Hi, I wanted to record a quick video this week about the competitive scale and the scale of competition levels in different markets and different industries. In economics, we used to teach this using categories like monopoly and oligopoly and cartel and perfect competition. But not all markets and not all industries fall into one of these neat categories. So, what we teach now is sort of a scale of competitiveness from what we call true price takers, who have to take the price that they're given by the market. A price taker has virtually no influence over the price that they can charge, to price makers. A price maker has much more power to set the prices that they're going to charge for their goods and services. So we talk about a competitive scale from pure price takers, who have to take the price that the market sets, to price makers. So let's look at that scale and look at some of the aspects and characteristics of each of those and those along the way. So I'll start with price takers. Price takers generally see one price in their market. There's one price for a good or service, and they have to just accept that price, and if they're selling something, they have to sell it at this price. This is a very competitive market. This shows that there are many different buyers and many different sellers. So there's a lot of competition in this market. So the prices here are not set by anything. The price is set by supply and demand. The price in a competitive price taker market is virtually completely set by the actors in the market themselves, buying and selling. The price is set by supply and demand, and the firms who are selling in this market basically have to take the price out there. It's a very, very competitive market where there are many buyers and sellers. The most obvious and pure example of this is the stock market. Stock market is very, very competitive. There are many buyers and sellers. If you want to buy a share of stock of, for instance, General Electric, there's one price in the market for a share of General Electric at any given time. That doesn't mean that price isn't going to go up and down, because stock prices do move, but there's really one market price. It's very competitive. You could buy that stock through any number of brokers, Vanguard or TD Ameritrade, or any of the Merrill Lynch, any of the banks and investment houses out there. They're very competitive. There are many sellers out there, and there are many buyers. Many people are buying and selling GE stock every day. This price is set by supply and demand. So if one investment house decided they were going to charge more for GE stock, obviously everyone would just go somewhere else. They wouldn't pay more for the same commodity they could get somewhere else. The same price of GE stock is the same everywhere. So brokers and stock market is considered a price taker. And we see this pretty commonly. We see price takers in the finance world, in commodities, in agriculture products a lot of times. One of the best examples I can give that people might buy on a relatively daily basis is when you put gas in your car. There are many, many gas stations in most places, at least most urban areas, and in even the smallest towns, there's typically more than one gas station, and they post their prices right out front on a big sign. So you can see the price before you drive up and decide where you're going to go. So if there are two gas stations in town and they have their sign posting their price, If one of them decides to raise their prices up, people are going to see the other sign and clearly go somewhere else. The prices are being set by the competitive market and supply and demand, and there are typically many buyers and sellers. There are other gas stations, there are other convenience stores, there's other places that will drive that price down. Here we see these are price takers. They're in very competitive markets. And I'll do the opposite of that here on the other side. Price makers, where it is a considerably less competition in the market. In this case, firms do have some control over the prices they charge. They can't charge, infinite amounts. They can't raise prices dramatically. They can't charge whatever they want and expect everyone to have to still buy it at all times. But in this cases, firms do have some control over prices. Here we see a situation usually where there are many fewer buyers and sellers. So this is a situation where there's less competition. It's a less competitive market. Fewer people are buying and selling and bidding those places up and down. Typically, we call the absolute least competitive market a monopoly. Mono meaning one, a monopoly. In a monopoly, by definition, there is only one firm or one seller, period. There is only one. If there's more than one, we have another term for that. A monopoly is the example of a price maker. If they're a monopoly, they have price control. They do have some ability to raise and lower that price. And in order to be a monopoly, this one is critical. There have to be no substitute goods. There can't be a substitute out there for this good where someone could go and choose to buy something else. Now that's critical about a monopoly, and I want to talk for a minute about monopolies and examples and what they may or may not be. A lot of businesses get accused of being a monopoly, and often they're not. In order to be a monopoly, there has to be one and only one firm selling that. They have to have some degree of price control that they can exercise as a price maker, and there have to be no substitutes. So your favorite artist putting on a concert or your favorite artist putting out an album is not a monopoly. There are substitutes. You don't have to buy that artist's concert tickets or that artist's album. You can buy a different artist's album. There are many substitutes to that. Amazon might be a very large retailer which ships things all over the world, but there are substitutes. There is competition. There are other places you can buy most of the goods and services from Amazon. Apple might be considered a monopoly on iPhones. Apple is the only place you can buy an iPhone, but there are substitutes for that. You can buy many other different kinds of mobile phones. In order to be considered a true monopoly, all of these things have to hold. True monopolies in this case are much more rare than we would typically see. What we see more often than monopolies is a business consideration called an oligopoly. In an oligopoly, there's not one firm, but there are few firms, just a few firms selling this goods and services. So cell phones might be an oligopoly, where there's really about 3 or 4 places in the mass market that really sell cell phones. Appliances might be considered an oligopoly, where there's about 4 or 5 different companies that make and sell appliances and not many. So there are few firms. They have less price control than a monopoly. And there are substitutes out there. So an oligopoly is when there's more than one firm, but there are still few firms. Another consideration that we look at when talking about the competitive scale is a cartel. And a cartel is where a few firms agree to work together. And they agree to work together typically to keep supply down and keep prices high. The goal of a cartel is to keep prices high so that they get more money for the goods that they're selling. Cartels are very, very rare, and they typically don't work very well. The prime example of a cartel that we see in virtually every textbook, because it's so easy, is OPEC. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC is the group of countries that have oil and sell oil on the global market. Oil is one of those commodities for which there are very few, if any, substitutes. Crude oil is refined into gasoline, into diesel, into all the products we use for fuel for cars, airplanes, equipment, etc. There's very few substitutes for gasoline. Electric cars really aren't ready to, electricity really isn't ready to power airplanes and large construction equipment, even though the electric vehicle market is growing quickly. So the countries that sell oil still have some amount of market power. And these countries band together and say, okay, we're going to all work together and we'll only produce so much oil. You only produce this much, and you only produce this much, and you only produce that much. And if we limit supply and there's not as much oil out there, we can keep the price up really high. So they all get together at meetings and they agree to do this, and they hand out how much everyone is going to produce of oil and how much they're going to sell, and that they hope keeps the market very high. The problem with this cartel and every other cartel is when you leave the meeting and they say, okay, I'm only allowed to sell this much oil, and they're going to keep the price very high. Well, even if it works and the price goes up, all of these countries think, I'm really only supposed to sell this much oil, but I'll just sell a little bit more. I'll just sell a little bit more and make a little bit money since the price is so much higher. I need to take advantage of this now in case the price goes down. So I'll sell a little bit more than I was allotted. And if every country does this and they all say, well, I'll sell a little bit more, then they're not limiting the supply anymore. The supply keeps going up, everyone keeps selling more, and the cartel doesn't work. For this reason, cartels are typically very, very limited. We don't see them very often, and even less, we don't see them being very successful. Cartels are often short-lived, and we always see cheating in virtually any cartel. So what we see here is a competitive scale from pure price takers who have to accept the price the market gives to absolute monopolies and price makers. And we know that firms can fall anywhere on this scale, and the difference is the amount of pricing power. It's the amount of strength they have to set their own prices independent of supply and demand, and how much influence they have over prices. So we rarely see very many completely pure price takers in the market who just see one price, like commodities or stocks. Even gas stations have a little bit of power to raise their price maybe a penny or two here or there. We very seldom see a pure price taker. Likewise, we very seldom see a pure price maker. We very seldom see monopolies anywhere in competitive markets and in open market structures anymore with one firm and one seller and where there are no substitutes. These people have absolute control over their price. They could raise and lower their price where they want. It's very rare. More often we see somewhere in the middle here. We see firms with some degree of pricing power, but not very much. And that degree of pricing power that they have typically comes down to how many firms there are, how many buyers they are, and how much control they have over price. So if you want to look at the competitive scale of an industry or a market, look at how much flexibility firms, buyers, and sellers have in their price. So that's our talk on the competitive scale this week. As always, if you have any questions, reach out and let me know. And thank you very much.